One.
Well, good afternoon, everyone across the country. It's Tim Phillips again, president of Americans for Prosperity. It's a big moment in this battle we've been fighting for months now to stop what we view as a misguided, big spending, special interest, kind of liberal special interest laden legislation that's been cooked up in Washington, D.C. As you know from following us, we've been doing rallies and events across the country. I'm coming to you live right now from Danville, Kentucky. We're doing a big event here to show the impact of big spending and frankly, bad policies like elements of the Green New Deal, et cetera, and the impact it has on rural communities, not just farmers, but small businesses and the folks out in the rural parts of the country. I grew up in rural South Carolina, so this is really close to my heart. But thank you for being involved in this. And we have a very special guest from Indiana, Senator Braun. Thank you for joining us and for being a part of this AFP Grassroots Facebook Live today.
Hey, my pleasure to do so. And I think we got about 20 minutes in total, and there's just an abundance of topics to talk about. I'm glad you're out there making the case in my neighboring state. So keep up the good work.
You bet. Senator, on Monday night, Chuck Schumer, Democrat leader, did something, it was a big moment, frankly, in this battle. Can you let our activists know what happened Monday and the impact it's got through the rest of this week?
So when you've been belaboring this discussion, and when you're talking trillions, remember the denomination is no longer billions. What we did in 08, 09, 800 billion. We throw trillions around like chump change currently. And of course, your listeners know we're borrowing every penny to do it. So what he did is had to get the thing moving, because probably the most valuable thing you've got as majority leader is the calendar. And the calendar only has so much time in it. And he had to say that, hey, we're going to take a vote to proceed. Well, what that means is we do not have a bill. We'll be voting to proceed on an idea, no text fleshed out. So whether that happens tomorrow or Thursday, it will not get a Republican vote. Sadly, it's due to the process. That's one thing here. Process is something that if it's off, you're going to get almost everybody probably against moving forward. What I'm interested in here, there are just a handful of us that, let's say the process is perfect, then are you going to have the political will on the underlying policy to say no? You know, I'm a believer that in the federal government, get a few things right. Defending the country is one thing. I'm one of the few senators that votes against the defense reauthorization bill because the Defense Department will not subject itself to an audit. It's not sacrosanct. Infrastructure is probably something we ought to get right, but pay for it, not with gimmicks, not with borrowing generally, and all that stuff. So we got to be careful. This just gets the process scooting along because they know they fumbled the ball along the way because their case is weak. We're not even talking about the policy that's going to be within it. And you want me to go into that now, or do you?
I tell you, Senator, we've got it. What my understanding is, what Senator Schumer did was to say, okay, later this week we're going to do a cloture vote to move forward on what's being called a bipartisan bill. But, and again, if I'm wrong, tell me. I'm looking from the outside in. It looks like they haven't revealed what's in the legislation. So they would be asking senators like you and others to move forward. Is that accurate?
Exactly accurate. And the reason he's making a bold move like that, and let me tell you why he is bold. Democrats are political entrepreneurs, okay? I'm an entrepreneur from the real world where you enterprise, you pay for things, you have things planned out ahead of time. If you had a goofy plan like this, you wouldn't get any investors in it. Here, it's the federal government that has no guardrails, now believes in the modern monetary theory on the other side of the aisle, that regardless of annual deficits and cumulative debt, we can just keep merrily going down the road. So That's about what they had. Clearly, we do need an investment in infrastructure. How do you pay for it? That is the issue whenever you get down to anything here. And it's full of gimmicks. It's talking about, well, we'll get savings from programs 5 to 10 years down the road. It doesn't get into hard pay-fors. That'll lose some of us even once we get into the process being played out.
Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen watching, many of you have reached out to your senators in the last few weeks, but if you haven't done that, if you would take a moment right now, click that I volunteer link right here on the Facebook link. It'll very quickly, you can punch in a very short amount of information, and then boom, you can send your message to your senator, to your two senators, saying, hopefully, no, don't move forward. Let's actually find out what's in this legislation. Let's make sure that it's paid for so we don't keep adding up debt. Let's make sure that it does not include elements that are not about roads and bridges, which we agree with the senator. That's important. It's one of the core functions of government is infrastructure. What they're doing, though, it seems like, certainly on the left, is they're also including elements completely unrelated. And part of that is the Green New Deal. Part of that is elements of the PRO Act, which would, in our view, infringe on individual worker freedom. We don't know what's coming in here, but it's very troubling. So take a moment, click that I volunteer link, make your voice heard. And Senator Braun, I've talked to you before, and you've said that you and your colleagues, you pay attention. You look at how many folks back home are contacting you on an issue. Can you, folks may be sitting here going, does it really matter if I reach out to my senator or House member? Can you let folks for a moment know what that means when you're getting input from folks back home in Indiana for you?
Well, I can relate to that mostly in a place that really works. Indiana back in 2017, when there was that interaction among stakeholders on infrastructure. And AFP was there making its voice heard. And we need to hear that. Sadly, there are only a handful of us that generally remain true to principle. And that's even on policy that we like. We'll vote against it if there's not an offset, if you're not cutting spending somewhere else, if you're not maybe engaging a public-private partnership. It's got a lot more rigor to it than just borrowing the money, which is what we're going to end up doing on especially the soft infrastructure bill. And that's all a misnomer because that isn't real infrastructure. Roads and bridges would be what we all focus on first, then rail, inland waterways, air, maybe rural broadband. That's got some tangibility to it. And if there's a way to pay for it, and I know that AFP's got a certain point of view on user fees, and I understand that is the closest you get to tying it to how you pay for infrastructure, but it still doesn't address the question that we were generating record revenues pre-COVID. In other words, with the tax cuts that were put in place, I just read a moment ago that Ron Wyden, head of the Finance Committee, is wanting to take away the 20% qualified income tax deduction for small businesses and pass-throughs. That was news to me up until just about 5 minutes ago. So they're going for broke. Remember, they're political entrepreneurs. They're better than we are as conservatives of packaging anything, calling it a fancy name, and then lowering the boom, because when they see the opportunity, they'll ram it through. To me, it's a question of how much they get ahead of their political skis here, because I've never seen anything like the basically 10 trillion we've added to our debt since I become a senator in January of 2019. And 4 trillion, maybe you could justify for the uncertainty of COVID that you had to do something. A lot of that was misguided and misspent. And now this is all above and beyond. And you can see what they're going to do when they hold the reins of power. That's why 2022 is so important.
Yeah. Senator Braun, we've been seeing inflation spike over the last few months, and it's not just in one sector. It seems food cost, travel, gasoline, It's a plywood. I was talking to some folks at a Home Depot, and they were telling me plywood costs are up. Uh, is inflation that we're seeing, and the administration is trying to say, don't worry, this is only temporary. But as I read the Wall Street Journal and listen to business folks that I trust, both small and such, they say they're really worried that it could be here to stay for a while because of all this overheated spending. Do you have a view on that with inflation, the impact it has, and maybe what could be causing it?
I think clearly inflation has had a lid on it for over a decade. It's a global economy. A lot of inflation is held in check, the cost push type, because you've got the flexibility of finding where across world markets you get the best value through the principle of comparative advantage. On the monetary side, we've had an accommodating policy for a good while. So we've been lucky, though, that in general, it has not been on the radar. But you cannot throw $10 trillion worth of fiscal stimulus, even justifying part of it to save the economy. And there could be something there, but I blame a lot of that on bureaucrats that tipped the economy sideways in the first place. Probably didn't need to have essential businesses non-essential. Would have been a different way of navigating through it where you didn't need to spend $4 trillion. Now that we got that happening, this is like nothing I've ever witnessed in running a business for 37 years prior to what government has done. Remember, 800 billion is where the federal government came in for the 08-09 downturn. And we're going to expand upon that by roughly 12 times when we're through these 2 years. Those chickens will come home to roost. Jerome Powell, through the Fed, has said he thinks it's going to be short term, not if we accommodate this kind of spending. And what does that mean we're going to do in 2022? What's the new baseline going to be? Is it running 1.5 trillion deficits from here on out? That is not going to end well.
Yeah. In 2017, then President Trump and Republicans in the House and the Senate passed what I believe was one of the most important, I would say historic pieces of legislation, that tax cuts and tax reform effort. It lowered every single bracket on the individual front. It cut what was a really high corporate rate, among the highest in the developed world, down to 21%. It did some other streamlining for S corps, small businesses. It seems like there's talk in some circles on the left, Senator Braun, of rolling back some of those tax cuts and tax reform. Can you tell us how real that threat is, A, and then B, what do you think the impact would be if we begin tinkering or rolling back some of that tax reform and tax cuts from 17?
The current negotiations are not for infrastructure, hard infrastructure, which is kind of faltering. The process that we talked about earlier that Schumer's putting into motion, that is not supposed to have any of them. That's going to be in the reconciliation package. And some of that is put out there for a foil, then to blame it on Republicans that they couldn't raise revenue. But what it doesn't acknowledge is that we had hit the sweet spot of taxation with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Revenues were increasing 4.5% to 5% a year, but spending, due to the weakness here of making things mandatory instead of discretionary, where a lot of it used to be, has been going up 6 to 7%, mostly driven by entitlements and the fact that we put other forms of spending on autopilot. So I almost got the CBO to revise their 1.5 trillion over 10-year deficit hit to where it was looking like it was going to be nearly neutral. They're undoing all that. And if you're familiar with the Laffer curve and that idea that there is a sweet spot, and over the years with super high rates or low rates, we generate between 17 and 18% of our GDP in revenue. But with high rates, we have a 1% economic growth. With the lower rates, we have closer to a 3%. And they don't acknowledge that. And we're going to lose all of that. And sadly, we're going to be on such a sugar high in 2022 that no one is going to really see the mid and long term impact. And who knows where we'll be at with the price of gas, where the inflation will be in the 5 to 7% range. If it's way above $3 on gas, 5 to 7% on inflation, then they shot themselves in the feet on this, because that's getting too far ahead and they'll pay the price then. No pain felt in the present. Politicians out here don't give a darn, and they hardly ever, like in a business, have to make their decisions in the present, because you know that'll impact your competitiveness and your viability mid and long term. It's completely the opposite here.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen watching, again, if you would click that I volunteer link, it takes about 1 minute and 15 seconds. Punch in some very brief information. It will then send your message to stop these massive spending bills and some of the social engineering and the far left provisions that are being put in here. To your two senators, take a moment, if you would, if you haven't already done that. There are thousands of you watching from across the country right now. Make your voice heard. I tell you, Senator Braun, I'm out here traveling the country. I was in Jacksonville, Florida last week, and Dallas, Texas, and I feel a lot of Americans out here, especially our Americans for Prosperity activists. They're looking at Washington. They're seeing the inflation go up. They're sensing that it's going too far, that the administration and Speaker Pelosi and Mr. Schumer, Senator Schumer, they're going a little extreme. They're going too far. I know you travel Indiana relentlessly across your state. Are you getting any sense from the folks back home as you talk to them, business folks, farmers, folks, senior citizens, et cetera, as to how they're viewing what's happening in Washington, or what some of the attempts are on the policy front in Washington?
Probably the thing I hear most often is that the federal government should not be competing with the labor supply by having extended unemployment benefits out there. State like Indiana, we had a 3.5% unemployment rate, if not a little lower, pre-COVID. My home county and town, the biggest manufacturing place in the state of Indiana per capita, 1%, maybe 2% in our county. Wages were going up the old-fashioned way because we were competing for labor. That's valid. Government steps in and competes, then that's different. And that's why you got so many jobs out there that aren't getting filled. That's the number one thing I hear traveling throughout Indiana. Hoosiers are practical. We live with a balanced budget amendment. We believe in rainy day funds and doing things that prepare for the future, not depending on government. This is the exact opposite out here. I used the word earlier. Democrats are political entrepreneurs. Their growth business is the federal government. They're just not very good at finance. Even when you love a place as much as they do here, they ought to be worried about torpedoing it with this kind of craziness that's not sustainable.
Yeah, I mentioned a couple of times some of the Green New Deal provisions. Some of them are regulatory, some of them are more cronyistic, where the administration and Senator Sanders and Senator Whitehouse and some of the other folks on the far left, they want to invest in only green energy and pour money into things like electric cars and charging stations. And I can tell you at Americans for Prosperity, we're for all of the above when it comes to energy. But we're for the market deciding. Let American consumers decide what they want to buy. Don't have government trying to tilt the playing field. It always has unintended consequences. And when it comes to these extraneous provisions, whether it's the Green New Deal or some of the PRO Act elements, or I understand some of the immigration elements that the administration wants to add into the partisan bill, the big bill. Do you think most of your colleagues on the Republican side, or I'll ask just you, do you worry about all these extraneous things when you're trying to call it an infrastructure bill? Can you address that for a couple of moments for our audience?
Wouldn't it be nice if you can all of a sudden change the definition? Again, the infrastructure, we all know we need it, but it's tangible infrastructure like we referred to. They're Madison Avenue experts. The American Rescue Plan. Sure, we went through COVID. Maybe 10% of it was that. Sounded good. This is the American Jobs Plan. Sounds good. And then the American Family Plan, which gets into all the soft infrastructure. Not to say there aren't issues there, but in the context of, look at the federal government. It takes in 3.5 trillion normally, spends about 4.5, roughly overspends 23% when the money is given to them by the productive economy. And that's the way they roll. So yes, they're going to do it. They don't care about the consequences. On the other hand, when it comes to conservatives that believe in limited government like we do, we can't be the party of no, or I'm not interested, because we got walloped back with Obamacare when we weren't embracing free market reforms. Like, I've been the loudest senator. You shouldn't be like an unregulated utility when you're in the healthcare business. You should embrace transparency, get rid of the barriers to entry, promote full competition, and engage the consumer. No, the Dems want to grow government and do it along with a broken system. Their other crown jewel would be the Green New Deal. And if we don't offer statements like you just said, let's have the cleanest, least expensive fuel and let the market sort it out. Otherwise, it's moronic, because hell, the Chinese are going to go their own way. They're the largest emitter of CO2 anyway. And you can't do things that are going to be self-destructive. But on the other hand, conservatives have got to be based upon innovation, competition, and ideas that aren't going to try to sift resources through government. Our party needs to do better at that. And I come from the Main Street entrepreneurial world, where I embrace competition and put up with the consequences. If I don't do a good job in my transportation and distribution business, I'll be taken out by the competition. Government doesn't have that. So that's the dilemma we're in.
Yeah. Senator Mike Braun, last question. I know I've intruded on your time for a while, and I need to get back to the floor of the Senate. I've known you for a while. I know, we face challenging times right now as a nation, no question about that. But I also know you've got a sense of optimism about the future of this nation and where we're headed despite the challenges we face. Can you leave folks in the audience with why you do have a sense of optimism, of hope moving forward for our country?
Well, I'll say, for one thing, I'm lucky I was dropped into Indiana in Jasper, was able to build a distribution and logistics business, which is not generally high margin by nature, but you put hard work, you look at the long run, make your decisions accordingly. You at least have an Indiana economy that embraces enterprise and not government. When we got to California 10 years ago, they're worse than the federal government in terms of rules and regulations. Insult you, I think, with a 13.3%, state income tax. It's not going to cut it. We've got a federal system that enables capital and people to flee places that are as unwelcoming as a place like California. That gives me ultimate optimism. Imagine if we were straitjacketed into a country that rolled like this, and we didn't have the flexibility, at least within it, to chart different courses. And I think also that spirit that built the country on freedom, liberty, hard work, yes, failure sometimes because you didn't make the right decisions, the accountability that goes along with it, we're not going to lose that. The federal government, this will end in a calamity because there's no political will out here, most likely. And then when we reconstitute, we'll still have enough of a system left that's got all the principles I've talked about. And I hope it doesn't go through a federal bankruptcy, because then the elderly that depend on retirement and healthcare, and those that are less fortunate that can't afford healthcare in a broken system, they'll be the casualties. And we will rebuild then. And I hope this place, for as smart as most of the members think they are in the Senate, the board of directors of the country, that we're preemptive. But if it does not happen to where we correct it, I really believe we'll fall back, maybe figure out what made the country great. It's not the federal government. It's freedom, liberty, enterprise, and choice.
Senator Mike Braun, well said. Freedom, enterprise, choice. That's exactly right. Not Washington, D.C. pushing things from the top down on Americans. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking about how it's a big week in the Senate right now. Senator Braun laid it out for you, these key votes taking place on legislation that Americans don't even know what's in that bill because it's hidden away right now. Make your voice heard. Make sure you click that I volunteer link, post on social media, talk to folks in your neighborhood. You know, Americans trust folks that they know, and that's you. So reach out, talk to your folks in your community, and let's make sure we get this country back on track. I'm Tim Phillips from near Danville, Kentucky, on the road as part of our effort to stop this overspending coming out of Washington, D.C. Hope to see you soon. Thank you. And Senator Braun, thank you as well.
Thank you.